Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday Edition. Our topic this morning is the latest podcast produced by the Post-Gazette and reporter Mike Foucault, and also the editor, producer Ashley Murray, edited by Virginia Lynn. The topic is To Love and to Perish. It's about a murder case that happened in 2006 in Blairsville. Jerry Miko, the senior editor for The Slide for the Post-Gazette, joins us this morning as well, and you've got a question.
Yeah, I do. In just describing the murder and how it happened, Dr. Wecht, you did that in the last segment, just the brutality of that murder, when you saw it, and Mike, of course, you reported it for us, what did that tell you when you were there and you saw the scene and you've examined hundreds, thousands of crime scenes and done so many examinations? What did that tell you right away when you saw it, number one? And number two, in a small town like Blairsville, this investigation took much longer than it probably should have, and you guys addressed that, but when you see a scene like that, what does it start to tell you right away?
Well, examination of the body, even before you know anything about the scene in the background, for me, as an experienced forensic pathologist, tells me that you're dealing with something of a highly personalized nature. The extensive nature of these injuries, the multiplicity, the severity, indicate to me clearly that this was not, a robber, a burglar, somebody coming in and having a casual argument, or something drug-related, etc. And of course, you work from there. You make your findings in a scientific fashion, and you pass them on. The other point that you make, and one that we have addressed, is what took so long. And while some people may try to find excuses and reasonable rationalizations, I think when you keep in mind too something, I think Mike just mentioned in passing, there was a footprint that fitted exactly the size of the shoe that State Trooper Foley wore, and the kind of a shoe. It's a very special shoe that these state troopers, especially, and Foley apparently had a couple dozen pairs over the years and so on. So they were able to, now it didn't tell you specifically that's Foley, but that shoe, which he was known to wear, and as he's at Blairsville in a small town and so on, how
almost
long
like
does it
the
take?
O.J. Simpson case with the shoe there. But what about Jerry's point, Mike, about this just didn't happen in Blairsville?
In Blairsville, a tiny town, they had not had a homicide in 2 decades, and that homicide was drug-related. So this very quickly was seen that it was not a home invasion gone bad. And as Dr. Wecht said, it was clear from his examination that this was of a personal nature. Now,
it's of a personal nature. We understand that there was a triangle going on, but Dr. Yelnick was not poor either. He was wealthy, wasn't he?
He was a millionaire. However, he didn't really care for money. He drove an old beat-up car, didn't own a computer, didn't own a cell phone. What he liked to do with his money was to help other people. He bought people used cars for transportation. He paid for people's down payment, anything that he could help his community, he did. He was beloved in his community. No one disliked Dr. Yelnick, except for 2 people.
Then, I don't know, I don't think we mentioned that this was the day
I was
before
just going to get to that. Yes.
The final settlement on the divorce was to be accomplished. In fact, a little party had been set up with Dr. Yelnick's family to kind of just celebrate in a private fashion. The next day, the signing of that divorce paper would have, over the period of time in terms of sustenance and support, and then a huge life insurance policy, would have amounted to millions of dollars for Michelle, his estranged wife, who had been living for a couple of years with the State Trooper Foley. I mean, you could have called in a little group from sophomore class in high school, and they would have solved it for you in 24 hours.
Yep. Well, was the murder committed because of the divorce, and as Dr. Wecht indicated that it was going to be finalized, or was this more of the crime of passion sort of thing?
Well, we don't know because Foley testified at his trial and denied doing it. He hasn't spoken since. I've reached out to him numerous times in prison. He's refused to speak to me. I think it's very clear that there was hatred. And I think that Foley, for whatever reason, went to that house through an unlocked back door, had a confrontation with murdered him, and then went home. I mean, that raises the question, does it not? What did Michelle see when he came home? Was he not covered with blood? So nobody, they have not charged Michelle with anything. She has denied being involved. And so we're left to wonder what really happened.
Well, go ahead.
Doesn't it just seems so out of the... Foley gets everything he wants here. I mean, why even go there? Why have the confrontation? Why do it?
That's the thing that makes no sense.
And why to this day does he not, if he's not going to admit to it, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It's the pure senseless murder kind of thing.
Well, yes, and I would like to just emphasize
Not that any murder is sensible.
A point that Michael made, and that is that justice was not, in my opinion, completely served. To believe for one moment that Michelle, Yelnick's estranged wife, would not have been aware of this, if not going in, coming out, etc., you know, is to believe, maybe like some people do, there was still an intruder in the JonBenet Ramsey case. You know, people, there's always somebody out there at the fringe. And then the state troopers that Michael has talked about, which I describe in my book in detail, what they knew, what was told to them, etc. Not going to put them in jail, but to my knowledge, there was no disciplinary action undertaken at all. So just take this case out of the law enforcement realm in terms of who the likely perpetrator was, and think of it in terms of you or me or anybody, Joe Brown or Harry Smith and so on. Do you think it would have been handled in that way investigatively after the crime? And do you think that it would have played out the way that it has? And do you think there would have been a withholding or a failure to implement charges against other people involved? I think not. This case, I don't believe, I can't speak for and do not speak for the Yelnick family. I don't think that they're happy that things were not pursued, but it's not going to happen.
If the state police did drag their feet, as we're alluding to in this particular case, is that a proper way to phrase it, Mike? Or
I think I would say they weren't looking where every indication was they should have been looking.
All right, if that's the case, then finally the Attorney General's office is called in. Who then did make the investigation?
It was under the office of Tom Corbett, the AG at the time. Tony Krastik was the prosecutor, and a statewide investigative grand jury was convened. And after 6 months, they issued a presentment that's called for the arrest of Foley on homicide charges.
They never went, excuse me just a second,
Yeah,
yes. They never even indicated any inclination to indict Michelle Yelnick?
Krastik tells me, and you can hear it in the podcast, that had they been able to arrest her, they would have. But you have to remember, if there's a conspiracy between two people, and neither of those people talk, there's no way to prove it.
Okay.
I just wanted to, number one, emphasize reference to Krastik. Did a great job. I worked with him in the Johnny Gamage case. And the second thing that must be mentioned is a key element of this case in terms of the prosecutorial's prosecutor's presentation was the outstanding work of DNA by Dr. Mark Perlin. Right here in Pittsburgh, head of his True Little Lab. He's an MD, PhD, and one of the leaders in DNA technology.
Well, how did DNA play a part in this?
fingernail materials, which I collected at autopsy, had been submitted. And they were tested by the FBI lab, by another private lab, and then they reached out to Dr. Perlin, and his work totally removed the possibility of this material being anybody else's other than the defendant Foley. And I wasn't sitting in the jury room, but I think that DNA evidence it contributed significantly to the jury's verdict.
Mike, do you get a sense that the Yelnick family will ever get closure?
I don't think that they will. I think that they are pleased, obviously, that Foley is in prison on a life sentence. He's exhausted all appeals. But I think they feel that justice was not completely served.
In which way?
In that really the only impetus for this homicide is the contentiousness and hatred that Michelle had for John Yelnick, and that Foley was the he performed an act that perhaps she had poisoned the well so much that he did.
Now, one final question. We are about out of time here, but they chose to seek life in prison and not the death penalty. Could they have gone after the death penalty in this case?
Not to my knowledge. It didn't have the prerequisite things that are required for a death penalty.
And did she get any money out of at the end of all of this?
Yes, she did. She got the $1 million life insurance policy, although only to the extent that it would pay for child support for their 6-year-old son up until the point when he was 18. He is now 19 years old. He has inherited the remainder of that payout and all of Dr. Yelnick's estate, which is rather large.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us this morning on the KDPG Sunday Edition. Jerry and I will be back in just a couple of moments.